Good afternoon. We appreciate everyone joining us today, and we're very excited to have Greg Rassier and Jeff Nieman joining us from Meduit, and they're going to give us their expert knowledge, share with us on an examination of self-service versus full-service patient billing for healthcare revenue cycle management. This webinar is being recorded and added to the IRHA resources for all of our members around the state. Just a quick housekeeping items before we begin. As I mentioned, we are recording today's session, and it will be available on IRHA's YouTube channel within 1 week once the recording is processed. If at any point during the presentation you want to ask a question, please use the Q&A function. The function is accessible by hovering your mouse over the screen. It should pop up either at the top or bottom of your screen, depending on what view mode you are in. IRHA staff will keep an eye out for those questions and will moderate for our speakers. They will now introduce themselves, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Tina. I appreciate it. Jeff Nieman, I'm the CEO of Meduit. My background has been, the first half of my career on the provider side of revenue cycles and working with HCA and 10 at large kind of publicly traded companies. The second half of my career has been over on the vendor side here with a couple different vendors, but I've been with Meduit for the last 5 years. So today we're going to talk about full service versus self-service, a topic that Greg and I have become very passionate about over the last couple of years, as we've unfortunately seen the self-service side of this fail on numerous occasions, and just want to share our observations and experiences and provide some guidance on where organizations should be going and how to do this the right way. Greg, you want to do a quick introduction?
Yeah, Greg Rassier. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for Meduit. I've been in the call center space for over 30 years, been in healthcare since the early 2000s, dedicated to the patient side and the healthcareization of technology and patient communication. So want to be able to talk about the full scope of things. I will apologize on the recording today, suffering through a little allergy problem, so the voice is a little off. I'll try to mute any coughs if I can, but Jeff, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Greg. So we'll start with just a little overview of Meduit. If you're not familiar with the company, we have about a dozen offices around the United States. Those are listed on the right-hand side here, but work with hospitals and physician practices across 48 of the states in the U.S. The push pins there are a representative sample of our customers. It's not, every single customer we have, but when you do that, it kind of covers the entire map. So it does give you a sense of kind of where we are in our presence. Obviously, a very strong presence in the Midwest and kind of Great Lakes region. Again, a few just statistics here. We've got over 1,000 hospitals and physician practices that we work with, about 150,000 physicians that are supported. Some of those are independent practices. Many of them are, affiliated with a larger health system, though. And, we're doing everything from, PB versus HB follow-up to combined SBO type follow-up as well, if you're familiar with all those different environments. We've got about 1,700 employees across those offices that we showed on the prior slide. And the company is 100% dedicated to healthcare revenue cycle. That said, we're a very large organization. Just to give you a sense, we managed about $56 billion in AR in 2022. So kind of on par with the size of the largest health systems in the US when you aggregate up the AR from all of our customers that we're working with. And I will say one of the key differences about Meduit is that we're truly an independent company, and as a result work with every single one of our customers on an individual basis to ensure that we understand their goals and objectives of delivering revenue cycle excellence to their customers and patients at the end of the day, and ensure that we're an extension of them in that delivery. As a result, we focus really heavily on our Net Promoter Score. If you're familiar with that at all, those range from -100 to +100. So we're very proud of now 3 years in a row having a score north of 50, and and our highest score ever with our highest participation rate last year of 68. So again, that's a great score on par with organizations like Ritz-Carlton, BMW, Apple, organizations with a very, very loyal customer base. And that's obviously comes with a lot of work and effort and knowledge sharing like we're going to do today. Next is just a depiction of the revenue cycle from scheduling all the way through reporting, charged off receivables and so forth on the far right end of the slide. The offshoots here in the colored boxes are just different services that Meduit provides actively today. Obviously, what we're talking about today is really the patient engagement experience, which does span the entire revenue cycle from how you're communicating with patients before service and working with them all the way through post-service billing and collections and the entire follow-up process, which may be in-house or maybe in partnership with different vendors. Either way, I think hopefully today we'll give you a perspective on, what are the best practices out there, what's the right balance between, self-service for patients and having a more comprehensive service offering.
So to that point, I think Jeff mentioned it, it's about balancing and trying to identify your entire patient consumer base and what's the right methodology to be able to properly connect with them in the methodology and the right timing that fits with each one of the different components of your patient base. So there's a lot of the old school methodologies, right? The typical business office, taking inbound phone calls, sending out live paper statements, all the way through to, what's maybe newer edge with digital communication via email or text or chat, as well as the more standard solutions, right? Being able to make outbound calls, being able to use, interactive voice response systems to create more automation, patient plans, patient financing. And so talking about the full suite of how you use these tools and what's the right balancing points for you to be able to maximize that patient engagement, which again, it's one of those primary goals here is to get the patients more engaged with their own revenue cycle and how to be able to solve and understand where they're at in this process. And I'll say, as I mentioned, old school things like statements and phone calls, inbound call centers, business office, whatever it might be, still relatively important considering the patient base we deal with. But it's about taking that next step. What is the next way that we start to stretch to create better patient engagement and get them involved in this process on resolving what is becoming more and more their responsibility, even trying to stretch it to the newest aged solutions that are out there today or coming soon to hospital systems and physician providers in the near future.
Yeah, so as Greg said, we're going to start the conversation with probably the highest tech interaction that we've seen so far, and it's one that we use with a handful of our customers, certainly probably our most advanced customers, but it's a app that's specific to your hospital and patient engagement, right? So literally having a app that the patient can download onto their phone, whether that's branded to the hospital, or in our case, there's actually a app that's called the Patient Concierge app. You see a little depiction of it there on the bottom. In our particular case, we've got a avatar. You see her name, her name is Eve. And patients can do things like scan a bill or take a picture of a bill, and Eve can walk out and explain different areas of the bill to them as they point to it, right? They can then link into a call center via clicking on a call button. They can go out electronically and click on a button that takes them to the payment portal, whether that's, like a proprietary portal or, Epic MyChart or something like that. It can really link and hook into anything, but it provides a variety of self-service opportunities for the patient to engage in, but also lets them opt out and talk to a human being if they want to, right? So they're not forced into a self-service only type of event. The other really cool thing that an app can do for you is you can set up and utilize geofencing with your app. So you can literally track the patient, a little Big Brother-ish, but you can track them when they're at your facility, near your facility, whatever, and send them specific messages either within the app or even a text message to do things like welcome them to the hospital, right? So if you have a geofence around the property of your facility or your practice, when they show up, you could send them a text message, or, you know, just if they walk in the front door, you can send them a text message with directions to where they need to go for service that day. When they leave, you can send them a thank you note and a request to link to a patient survey or something like that. But there's all kinds of really cool things you can do, assuming the patient allows you to track their location through the app. But lots of pretty engaging things here that are capabilities in this day and age that not many folks are thinking about. Again, we don't see broad adoption of this type of technology yet. It's really on kind of the leading edge of where things are going. But, you know, some of the most advanced 2-3% of facilities that we work with are starting to use some sort of an app that's specific to their facility to engage patients.
From old school statements all the way to new age apps and kind of everything in between.
All right, so again, what we're going to cover today is just an analysis of self-service solutions. There are a lot of pitches out there that we've seen over the last couple of years in the marketplace. Probably the most common ones are just, we're going to come in and completely build self-service for you, and we're going to text your patients, and they're all magically going to go out to the portal and pay on their own, and you're not going to have call centers and people to explain things to patients anymore. You know, we'll talk through that and really explain to you the reality versus the myth of that. We'll provide some real-world case studies on things that we've seen actually happen with several customers. Unfortunately, we've had a front seat to many of these and how they crash and fail, and try to provide some guidance to the audience today on, you know, the right way to approach this and do this, and, you know, what types of tools are most beneficial when it does come to self-service. And that brings us to our first polling question. Tina, do you want to pull that up? All right, so we're just going to focus on question 1 for right now, if you'll answer that one. But what is your organization's current utilization of self-service and full-service payment solutions? So A is still using only traditional paper billing statements and payment options. B is you use only self-service options. In other words, you send letters and direct patients to the website, but you don't have call center, you don't have outbound or inbound folks assisting patients, that kind of thing. Or C is using full service options. So you're combining both of those two, you know, self-service, full service, and, you know, potentially even texting and doing other things with patients to interact with them. So A is traditional, B is self-service only, C is a combination of the two. So it would take a minute. And
yeah, and I know, Jeff, we have a limited audience today. Most of this is for the recording itself, for the rest of the group later on. So maybe just as we talk a little bit about what we have seen, we've had discussions with quite a few different groups around the country on this. I would say, you know, we're probably seeing somewhere in the 30% of the range of people that are using some self-service options. Maybe 10% of the folks that are trying to use full service options. But it's still a majority of 60% or so, if not more, are still basically using that traditional paper billing and payment options is what we see across the country. And, you know, it pops one way or the other depending upon certain groups and how far along they are in the digital pathway, or if they're just, you know, at least experimenting down that path. But you still seeing this a little bit heavier weighted across the board elsewhere.
yeah, Tina, did we get any results from that poll?
We did not.
Okay, so maybe we'll fly through the remainder of the polls here and just kind of share our experience with it. All right.
All right, is that clear now?
Yes.
You got a little, all right. So let's just talk a little bit about the facts, what's going on today. None of this is going to surprise anybody. The increased pressure on the patient continues to grow. I know this is going back and quoting some information from Forbes about how the patient portion has grown so significantly over the last 20 years. You know, what is it, you know, the the burden is coming onto the patient, whether it's the employers pressing the high deductible plans, less coverage, more money outgoing, just the rising cost of care. All of those things are going to continue to put more and more pressure on the patient. So at the beginning of the conversation, talking about striking the right balance, it's about how to get the patient more engaged. Half of this battle is not just about getting patients to be able to pay their balance. It's about getting them connected and changing kind of that cultural shift of, if I mail a letter, somebody may or may not open it up. They may just toss it, but how do I actually get them more directly engaged in this process? And with more and more pressure, people are going to have more questions. And so you need to think about how we're going to adjust the communication style and how we're going to set people up to be more successful in those engagements. So we know they're struggling. Providers collecting on those, will vary a bit based on demographic and how clean the revenue cycle is. But if you're only collecting 20 to 55% or so of that patient liability, there's obviously a lot of dollars on the table that are important, and it can be expensive and becoming more and more expensive. Talk about the old school concept of just sending statements. Well, statement costs are going up. The post office is in the midst of multi increases on postage over a 10-year cycle. There's been 7 or so already. That's not going to stop. The expenses of collecting on those dollars, the expenses of staffing to be able to handle phone calls, all of those things continue to ratchet up. So, as you think about self-service, where is self-service jumped into these conversations? New age, new context, the folks wanting to be contacted a different way. How many people prefer texts today to phone calls? How many people prefer phone call to a statement? And so there's definitely some viability of trying to increase the ability to connect with your patients. There's also just the expense of being able to send a text statement or an email versus a snail mail is dramatically different, 8-10x from expense reduction standpoint. Being able to have online phone apps that draw connection points to those patients, being able to have an IVR phone system where they're able to call in and connect directly to those to be able to resolve their bill, being able to have patient web portal where they can go directly to connect. So there's multiple tools in this self-service bucket, and as I mentioned, right, this convenience factor for patients, the cost is significantly different. We saw one of the stats that's on there that the patients and self-service is phenomenal, but we're starting to see some of the self-service providers advertise some data that's a little bit misleading per se. We're trying to just educate a bit on this, which is people using self-service technology 89% of the time. People are opening up the technology in a significant amount of time, but they're not necessarily 100% successful in resolving everything that they need. And actually, some of the data in reality shows that they're only successful 40 to 50% of the time. If you think about, Medicare age patients, they are more specifically focused on resolving the bill. They need questions answered like everybody else, but they typically want to pick up the phone and call somebody. And so we tend to see that 50% of the time, somebody wants to pick up the phone. So you got 50% of the time, people will then be looking at a digital solution. As they think about a phone call to deal with a complex situation, digital solution may not solve that problem. And so if 50% of the people are already picking up the phone, then what's happening with that other 50% of the folks, Jeff, that are not, starting self-service or that are starting?
Yeah, so the amazing thing is this is kind of the part of the story you don't hear, right? Which is that half of the people aren't engaging, but the half that do engage, 60% of them ultimately give up. They don't go on and just automatically complete a transaction. They get partway through the transaction, or they can't figure out how to navigate the technology, and they end up wanting to call somebody. So whether that's, actually a physical phone call, or it's a chat function that's out there on the website, they're looking for some additional assistance to figure out how to make a payment, or to get answers to questions on something that just didn't make sense as they were out there trying to get a payment or a payment plan set up. So again, interestingly, right, 50% aren't getting engaged digitally at all. They're just going to ignore it, which means if those are folks that would be paying you today, you're going to lose those payments. Those accounts are going to roll to bad debt. Of the 50% who do engage, if you don't have an ability for them to opt out and get questions answered and get some help, you're going to lose about half of them as well. So the reality is, of your entire patient population, in the multiple case studies we've seen now, the average is about 20% or so of patients will actually go out and 100% complete a transaction online digitally with zero interaction with call center or other human beings, right? So again, does this siphon off some of your volume? It absolutely does. You're not going to hear us say, don't do this or don't think about this. But what you're going to hear us say is, if you've got people pitching you that 80% of your volume is going to go away and 80% of your patients are going to self-serve, that is not what's happening. As Greg said, 80% might be logging on to the service, but then, they either immediately log out and don't complete anything, or they get halfway through and have to ask for help.
Yeah, you mentioned a good point. We're not downplaying the value per se, because we use every single one of these tools from soup to nuts. It's just be wary of the magic bean story that, a digital solution is going to solve all the problems. They can solve problems. They can be very fantastic tools if used the right way, but you also have to make sure you clearly understand, what is the bottom line actual impact going to look like.
Yeah, the other thing that's a bit of a myth that we want to dispel is we've seen these pitches like you're going to increase your patient payments 60% within 30 days of installing this new technology. Again, after having a front seat to half a dozen or more of these, we have yet to see any positive financial impact or cash acceleration from this. Again, we wouldn't deny that you're going to take people who would have maybe called you before or mailed in a check or something, and now that you have online capabilities, they're going to go out and pay online, but it really doesn't accelerate any payments. The people who paid you before are going to pay you now. The people who didn't pay you before still aren't going to pay you. Just because you created a website or some texting around that website to drive traffic to it doesn't magically make people who weren't going to pay you want to pay you, right? They're really just, we have yet to see a case study where there's actually any positive cash acceleration impact from only self-service implementations. Now, what we have seen, and I'll share a case study on this in a moment, we've seen organizations who all they were doing was billing the patient and answering inbound phone calls. When you deploy a full service solution, we've seen improvement in cash acceleration. But for organizations who are already doing whatever they're doing, and the only thing they change is they add a website, you're not going to create some massive cash acceleration event by just doing that. All right, so our second polling question, Tina, let's just flash this up and we'll kind of go through it, since I know we have a limited audience, and share what we've seen as our experience.
Is that what you want shown?
I don't see anything on my screen right now.
It says the poll was launched.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not seeing anything. Let's jump to the next slide, Greg. Let's just
that's fine.
Going through this.
We can, without the audience, significant audience today, we'll just skip the polls and we can answer those in questions wrapping up when if people have any concerns or wanted to discuss stuff after the recording hits.
Yep. All right, so just wanted to go through 3 specific case studies we've seen. Again, I think we're probably up to maybe 10 at this point that we could share, but some of them are very similar, and I think these are 3 that are pretty relevant. So in the first case, it was a customer who was a multiple hospital health system. They did add in self-service technology, so they were doing really more traditional paper billing and answering the phones and things from patients. They added into the mix just electronic capabilities where they could email statements to patients or text patients to drive them to a website that then had the display of the patient's amount due and ability for the patient to set up their own payment plans or pay in full or whatever, right? So the vendor who they brought in to do that and deploy that technology actually released a big case study after year 1. For a while, it was even on their website, not sure if it's still out there, but they increased patient cash by 13%. Right. So again, we had a front row seat to this and access to all this health systems patient payment data. And so we kind of scratched our heads and said, wow, that'd be really great if that's the story. And we started looking at it. And one of the things we knew is that this health system had bought an additional hospital during that 1 year. And so their volumes in that year were up 13% from that facility acquisition that they had done. Hence, you would expect patient cash to be up 13%. So the reality is, again, back to the zero impact comment from a couple of slides ago, there really was not any cash acceleration or new cash generation in this particular case that you would have seen, right? So was their patient cash up 13%? Yes, we would have expected it to be up 13% because their volume was up 13%.
Yep.
So no surprise there. The next case study is more the other thing I was talking about, which is a system that really only was doing, again, outbound letters and inbound phone calls to patients, no real combination of self-service technology. And so we worked with, partnered with them to deploy really what we would call full service, right? So we started doing outbound phone calls, patient segmentation. We started doing texting, chat, a variety of solutions, kind of the whole comprehensive set of solutions that Greg shared earlier. And in that case, the system did realize about $500,000 a month in increased self-pay collections. So again, about $6 million a year at the end of the day, a very substantial amount. And, we can't really speak to, we didn't have access to their financial statements. So it's hard to say, was that a $6 million reduction in bad debt expense? Was it a $6 million cash acceleration? Did all that drop to the bottom line? I don't know the answer to that. That's hard to say. But what I can tell you is even if it was just 100% of that was cash acceleration, they probably saved mid-6 figures just in collection agency fees alone by getting that cash in the door in the early out process and not having those accounts flow to bad debt. So again, huge advocates here of deploying a full service solution like that will produce real results. Just building a website and expecting people to ship really doesn't. And so here's another example of a case study where a large regional 600 plus bed health system had brought us in to deploy all of our early out and self-pay solutions. They did not have a website, didn't want one originally. But then after about 6 months, they decided to bring a third party in outside of us to create a website. And they got sold on all the things we were just talking about, right? We're going to have 80% of your patients engaging digitally. You won't need Meduit anymore to take those calls. And so they had this strategy of, we're going to have self-service only for the first 90 days. If a patient can't figure it out on their own, we're not going to have a phone number for them to call. We're not going to have any real way for them to connect and ask questions about their bills. But then you guys between day 90 and 120 can send them one bill with a phone number on it. So whoever doesn't self-serve in the first 90 days, we'll send them a paper statement at day 90, and you guys can have 30 days to work with the patient before we send it off to bad debt. So, there's this big belief that self-service was going to solve everything and drastically reduce their cost and agency fees with us, candidly. And so the next slide, I think, shows the outcome of that story. So they made it about 6 months into this strategy, to be honest. So I know it says less than a year, was actually about 6 months. What they saw was two things. One was a huge decrease in collections because a significant portion of their patient population didn't want to do self-service. And by the time they were getting to an actual paper statement and call center and only had 30 days left, a lot of those accounts ended up rolling unnecessarily, in our opinion, to a bad debt collection agency, right? When they could have been resolved really simply earlier on with human contact. And we should all know, I think, if you're on this call, obviously patients have confusion and questions about, just things like insurance adjustments, or, how did you get to the amount that I actually owe here? This doesn't make sense to me. And a simple explanation many times can get them there. And self-service technology typically isn't going to give them that explanation. So anyway, these guys figured it out about 6 months in that this wasn't working. They were seeing a decrease in cash collections in their early out pre-bad debt processes. And in addition to that, they had numerous patient complaints about the self-service technology and no ability to opt out and speak to somebody. So in combination, they went back to the way they were doing things before. They unplugged the website and self-service technology, created a more comprehensive solution, repartnered with us, and we moved back upstream and combined the best of both of those solutions to be able to, yes, provide self-service to patients, but being able to speak to them and talk them through the process as well.
Yeah, a couple really good points there to link and label back to. If half of your population still is going to pick up the phone before they try digital, and others that are going to get into the digital and still need to make a phone call, you've got to have the backbone behind it to be able to support the business. And also just the shock and awe of going from what was historically a paper-based group to trying to go 100% digital, probably too dramatic of a shift. I think we're huge proponents from wherever you're at in this cycle of developing patient communication. You should continue to keep trying to step to the right, keep taking the next biggest value for your patient base, to be able to communicate better, to give them more access to information, to culturally change their thought process of being involved. But trying to take too big a step all in one jump is going to create as many problems in customer dissatisfaction as it is going to solve from a financial standpoint. So being able to wrap around not only the theory of what you're trying to do from a financial piece, but also the reality of how it's going to affect the patients. I'll skip the live poll and just talk about, conveniently enough, what is the right mix? So I think that's the whole concept of what we try to pitch, is what is the right combination of things that not only offer the greatest convenience to patients, which is probably multiple points of communication cycles, whether it's statements, paper for those people that still want to get it, to electronic and digital communication, and everything in between to really change that cultural shift and get patients more engaged in what is an ever increasing responsibility for their own healthcare costs. And then being able to connect that with a highly skilled, empathetic, highly technology-driven call center solution that is going to be there to answer the questions. Because honestly, in those first 45 to 60 days of patient liability, there are more questions to be answered. There are problems to be solved. It is less and less about, oh, I just need to call to pay my bill. That's not really what most of these phone calls are for. And so you need to have, a quality, skilled person who's on that phone that can be able to solve those problems. That's what we look for more so in a call center agent is problem solving than somebody that can collect money. That's the easy part with patients. Solving the complexity of a bill, that's a little bit more difficult. So as you think about it, I mentioned keep pressing right. What's the next big steps? You would assume a good portion of the organizations have a patient portal, website that is created. If not, that's obviously a high value. I think from our perspective, from a contact, just picking up the phone and calling a patient, has got 8, 10, 12, maybe 15% contact rate for every person, for every 100 people I pick up the phone. Maybe I'm talking to 10 to 15 of those folks. Texting has really become probably the newest connective methodology that's driving the best involvement, and not just text. I don't just want to send a text, hey, this is Dr. X, this is hospital Y, and you've got an outstanding bill. What I'm really trying to do is text the portal. So I'm sending them a message that says, you've got updated information, you've got an updated statement. Let me link you through. If it's Epic, let me link you via text directly into my chart so I can look at the information. Or if it's a portal that's being designed just specifically for that provider, that's great too. But get the text out there to connect that patient directly back to the portal for a couple reasons. A, then they can help self-serve them their own answers. They can, provide information on insurance. They can make a payment. But again, cultural shift, right? Getting them used to using that digital solution. I think those things are valuable. We've talked about some of the apps that are really helping to define more, how do I don't understand my bill. Great. Let me have this app explain to you what's on your bill so that, again, I can free up the time of my limited human resources and staff to be really focused in on just, the kind of the more important things that are going on. And then obviously those natural things, the follow-up mechanisms, whether it's mail or phone or chat or IVR or texting, just to make sure that you're really summing up all of those things. I talked about this. I mentioned I've been in healthcare for a long time. I've been in call centers even longer. In the healthcare world and connecting with patients, we have to be very empathetic. You have to be very educated. You have to be problem solvers, connect with those humans, whether it's via phone or chat or even two-way texting. You've got to understand, what you're not talking about just a credit card bill that somebody ran up when they're doing X, Y, and Z. Healthcare is a different animal. It needs to be treated as such, and making sure that they've got those access to those call centers, highly skilled call center agents. And then just a couple other things to think about, whether this is your business office or if you're using a vendor or a partner to be able to do this. What are the things that you should be seeing or should kind of expect for your own business is the technology to be able to not only just record every phone call, but that you're actually getting some analytics on that. Speech analytics, voice analytics, tone. What are the key words? What are the voice of the patient? What are the things that they are saying about what's going on with the billing process? What are they saying about the statements? What are they saying about concerns? You can sum that data up and it becomes powerful information for you to be able to look up the revenue cycle as to what was happening with registration or scheduling or billing and be able to use that captured voice to include, to increase, again, your patient satisfaction and their involvement in resolving their own claims and using that information to improve your overall revenue cycle. And I know we would normally end on a live poll question, but I think we can skip that today. Jeff, any closing thoughts?
No, just appreciate the time from those who have joined, and for others who may listen to this later. To the extent that anybody has additional questions or just wants to brainstorm or share experiences, again, Greg and I are both really passionate about this, having seen some of these pitches not work the way that they should. And so we're happy to, just share our information and knowledge with anybody.
Jeff and Greg, there are some questions that I think our attendees and future viewers might be interested in hearing the answers to, because I am interested in these, in what your answers are. So you talked about patient support on the website and phone apps. Do you find that most patients prefer chat or calling?
It still calls. I think chat is probably, and I think about these waves of disruption to how communication is handled. It's historically always been via letter, and then phone calls really have jumped up over the last 10 to 15 years. Texting is now kind of at the forefront of driving change. I think chat will be coming soon as a more generally regarded patient communication tool. But phone calls today, because of the complexity and people don't understand their bills or why they owe what they owe, the phone call is still the primary communication method to be able to solve those problems.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yep.
So if an organization needs to prioritize its full service tools due to their budgets, what would you say are the most important ones to offer?
Yeah, patient portal right off the bat. You can call that a bunch of different ways of doing it. Patient portal for the phone, which is interactive voice response, and patient portal on the website so that people are driving pure self-service. And then closely, if you can't tell, I'm very passionate about the texting solutions. But again, texting, tying back to those portals. Again, you're not only talking about the fastest way to solve the problems, the biggest impact to the financial expenses of running a business office, but you're also talking about the best way to culturally shift patients and their engagement back into that self-service program, which ties back to the portal concept. So I think those might be three different answers to the same question, but I think they all tie together.
Okay, and Jeff is nodding his head. So Jeff, you have nothing to add to that answer?
No, I'd just add, I mean, on the past couple of things, I think we were actually just talking about one of our more advanced multi-hospital clients that uses chat today, and we were discussing volumes. And so just to give you a sense, in an organization that's had chat up and running for a couple of years, we get about 50 online chats per day versus about 2,000 phone calls. So supporting Greg's point, phone calls are still way more popular.
Yep.
They definitely are. The other thing I was going to say is just when it comes to texting, we have found that the results of texts are very similar to phone calls, meaning your answer rate, your engagement rate, and so forth are pretty equal between text and phone calls. To the extent that you want to get more specific, there's kind of a demarcation line, at least today in some of the studies that we've done, of about 55 years old in age. We're above that, you're going to have more success with phone calls. Below that, you're probably going to have equal or greater success as you get into the younger and younger age brackets with texting.
Great. And one last question. So what is the average increase in collections you are seeing from moving to only self-service tools to a combination of self-service and full-service tools?
Yeah, thanks. So that kind of wraps us with hopefully the whole theme for today, right? We have yet to see, after probably looking at this 10 different times, a positive ROI from just implementing self-service. Again, we see this pitch being made every day to hospitals and physician practices across the country. Just put this website in place, text patients links to the websites, and you're automatically going to generate all this cash you're not generating. We've heard about these. We have yet to see one where we've been engaged and actually been able to measure things. So that aside, as I showed in the case study number 2 earlier, there are some significant dollars available if all you're doing today is sending letters and waiting for those inbound phone calls, and moving to a much more two-way interactive engagement process with patients that include all the things we talked about, right? Email, texting, chat, all those different capabilities. You're going to reach a lot more patients. You're going to answer their questions sooner and get through all the objections and get them to payment sooner. So obviously there's a right way and a wrong way to do this. The wrong way is deploying a single solution and hanging your hat on it. The right way is to recognize that different patients want to be engaged different ways, and the more channels you give them, the better results you're ultimately going to get.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, I'd like to thank the people who attended today. And those who will be viewing this in the future. And also thanks to Greg and Jeff and Kristen, the marketing director. Meduit has been a longtime partner and supporter of IRHA, and we just really appreciate the expert knowledge you shared with our membership today. So thank you.
Thank you very much for having us.